weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, you have all heard me and Jim talking about we're working on something. We can't tell you what it is yet. Well, this is the week. It's a special announcement week. But before we talk about what it is, we have a great crew to introduce first. I'm Michael Dismuke. You can see my work at michaeldismuke.com. You know me, of course, as a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, lead writer for Captain's Log's solo RPG, and we'll announce in a second what else we've been working on. But before we do, let's go to Jim Johnson.
Hey, everybody. Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG and the Captain's Log solo RPG and some other stuff over at Mid-Dithius Entertainment. Also a freelance writer for Star Trek, science fiction, fantasy in general. I'm publishing and writing my own stuff. And then we got this big project that we're just about to announce here. So also co-host on this here podcast these 5 years now. 5 years has been amazing run. And we're just getting started. We got so much more to talk about. As Michael always says, the conversation always continues. And we've got two wonderful guests with us here today who we've been working very closely with now for a year plus. They are no strangers to this channel, no strangers to Star Trek Adventures. So I'll have them introduce themselves, starting with Kelli.
Hi, folks. I'm Kelli Fitzpatrick. I'm a science fiction writer, winner of the Star Trek Strange New Worlds contest in 2016, and longtime contributor to Star Trek Adventures. I'm also the author of Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers' Declassified, a very fun Marvel novel. And yeah, I'm excited to be back talking about Star Trek stuff.
Fantastic. And Derek, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Derek Tyler Attico. I'm a speculative fiction author. I am also a winner of the 2005 and 2016 Strange New Worlds anthology contest. I'm also the author of the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko and a contributor to Star Trek Adventures. And I'm happy to be here.
All right. And just so you all know, I consider us all co-hosting this episode together. So we're all going to ask each other questions. We're just sitting at the coffee table. You know, I know we're going to be all meeting up soon at Shore Leave in Pennsylvania to do this in real person. But by now, most of the people, even if they clicked on the link on YouTube or saw the advertisements, they know about Star Trek Timelines, which was released last week. Okay, so Star Trek Timelines, for those of you who maybe are just tuning in or listening in on Spotify and don't have an idea or your favorite podcast, it is a history of Star Trek, 60 years in the making. It goes all the way from the Big Bang all the way into the 32nd century and beyond. Every TV show episode, every movie, it's cataloged along a timeline so that now you have this visual story of the greatness that is the Star Trek universe. So I'll launch with the first question. Let's start with Derek, and then you pass the baton to you. How do you feel to have been part of this project?
Oh, wow. That's a really big and good question, Michael. How do I feel? I think this is my second time being part of a project, a Star Trek project that deals with an anniversary, right? The autobiography of Benjamin Sisko was for the 30th anniversary, and this project is for the 60th anniversary. And I think it's a really big honor, you know, anytime you're invited into something like that. I equate it a lot to like being a DJ for a VIP party. You know, you're hired to do the party, but everyone else is partying, but your job is to make sure that everyone else has fun, right?
Ooh, so I love that analogy.
Right. So part of what I and we all did was to make sure that this was done correctly so that everyone else could sit there and enjoy it. And then later on we could sit there and enjoy it, right? So that's my take on it, and I'll pass it over to Kelli and see what she thinks about that.
Yeah, I love the way that Derek sort of characterized this as sort of a responsibility. That's kind of how it felt when we were asked to come on this project. That we're really asked to take a franchise that has been loved for so long and put it together in a way that is coherent and entertaining and that will stand the test of time. For me personally, it feels like a coalescing of so many of my interests and skills because, obviously I love Star Trek. I've been writing in this world for 10 years now. I can't believe it. but I also have a background in journalism and teaching. I have 2 English degrees, and I'm an English teacher, and so teaching students how to like go through source material and summarize and research and things, and all of those skills were like super useful on this project in handling this material and putting this all together. So it feels like just an incredible honor to get to have been part of this and really contribute to something that I hope is going to be used and enjoyed by a lot of people for a very long time.
Jim?
Yeah, I think I'd echo Kelly and Derek and say that it was a huge honor to have DK reach out to me and to us to do this project. And I think over the year plus working on it, just the enormity of the project and the fact that we're standing on the shoulders of giants to build this one. So like we've got the Yakutas and Sternbach and like everybody who's come before us, Larry Nemechek, who have done all that work for the franchise over the decades, and now there's an opportunity to do the next generation of that, right? It's the chronology, it's the encyclopedias, it's a huge reference document that's going to be useful for the next generation, right? I mean, I know when I go into bookstores or even used bookstores and I see the old well-loved dog-eared copies of the chronology and the encyclopedia and stuff on shelves, it's like, oh yeah, that's going to be our book in 20, 30 years, and people are still going to be using it and referencing it. And there's a lot of, like Kelly said, there's a lot of responsibility in that because we want to do it well for not just the Grognard fans who've been with the franchise from the beginning, but all the new fans that we don't know yet who are going to need some sort of reference. Because I think at this point, after 60 years, it would be hard to just jump in and embrace the totality of what Star Trek is without a little bit of hand-holding. And so hopefully this book is a great reference tool, but also a hand to help people just navigate the depth of this franchise.
Yeah. I was thinking, I was humbled and shocked. I'm definitely the greenest one of all of you. Many of you have thick portfolios of work in and outside of Star Trek. Some of you are educators, 2 of you are educators. Jim, you're a project manager on 20, 30 plus, no, actually more than that, probably 50, 60 plus, actually more than that, because if I think about all of Modifius, 100 plus products, so it was definitely humbling and shocking, I think, for me. One of the goals we had, which as we look at the preliminary pages, which we'll have some previews of later, as we look at some of the preliminary, was getting one voice with all of the talent here, trying to come out as one voice so that when you're in whether you're in 1919 or whether you're in 3222, that it sounds like one character narrating this amazing universe. But definitely, a lot of shock going through here, and I know it's just a privilege to work with all 3 of you on this. It was good.
Yeah,
right.
And I want to express my appreciation for Kelly's expertise in journalism, because we got the call from DK from the beginning to say, we want all the entries to be factual, right? We want it to be fact-based, not a lot of storytelling, not a lot of stuff built into it, but like hit the facts, and especially with our limited word counts. And I think it was really helpful to Kelly for Kelly to have that expertise to say, well, we need to that one voice is going to come from us all being very factual instead of using flowery language or whatever. So it really helped, I think, make everything a little bit more consistent.
And without turning this into like a Discovery post-show panel, one of those ooshi-gooshi panels, I mean, I got to say too, that's true. And I don't want people to have to listen to that, but like Derek's knowledge of Star Trek, I bow before you. Like things that he just has in his head that I have to research. He's the walking memory alpha. So very, learning about all of you. I've worked with Jim for years, so I know your attention to detail and editing skills are top notch, but definitely learning that from Derek and repeating what you just said, Jim, was a lesson for me. I went to college on this book. That's for sure.
Yeah, and just to be fair, so that everybody gets to be highlighted here, Jim's knowledge of project management, I think, was super useful to have on this, to kind of have the 40,000-foot view of how all these pieces fit together, and he gave us some really useful reminders occasionally about that. And Michael, I really appreciated your enthusiasm and your excitement. That's just
all I brought to this, for sure.
It just lit it up though from the inside. This was a very long project, and it was a lot of work, and there were some moments where I felt that was really, really valuable.
Yeah. Speaking of timelines, let's tell people about that. When we got this back in February 2025, right? And the book is 336 pages. We don't know. It might be more or less depending on final edits, right? Yeah. So how did you all organize your schedules to accommodate this? I like getting people into the, background, into the weeds. How did you mentally tackle this, that you were going to handle your monumental chunk of this project?
Yeah. I decided that I was going to rewatch every single episode. Like I'd seen all of them, some of them multiple times, but I wanted to go back and get my head into all of them. So I decided, like, I normally am listening to audiobooks while I'm working out or while I'm cleaning or whatever, and I just put on the Star Trek episodes and had them run. And I just could listen to them, because I've seen them, most of them before. But that sort of like got me back steeped into the material, and then I could pause and like take notes and stuff. And there were certain sections that were like way more complicated. Like Discovery season 2, I had to very carefully watch multiple times because to work out all of the time travel stuff, but it just became sort of, I want to say, like the background track, for these months. And that was really cool as a fan to just kind of have that in the background.
Jump in. We're at the coffee table.
I didn't. I spent most of my mornings working on this because primarily my reason for that was because we're this book is a DK book, and our editors are in the UK, in London. So I wanted to be primarily on their time, So I would work a lot on during the mornings. I didn't. I have to say I really didn't watch any Trek for any of this. I read some of the teleplays and screenplays. I don't think I watched anything, and I did go to Memory Alpha sometimes just to check on little details, but I didn't watch any. It unfortunately or fortunately, it is stuck in my head. But yeah, and just try to stay on that time frame and commit about 4 or 5 hours a day to writing it, because it's a lot of material, and the only way is to just take it in chunks. So that was pretty much what I did.
Yeah, and for me, since I do so much work for Modiphius, and they're on the UK time schedule anyway, I'm up at the crack of dawn to be mostly on their time zone, because that way it gives me a chance to do meetings and stuff. And so that wasn't difficult to kind of sync up with DK's schedule. And then most of my mornings were committed to Modiphius and other work. And then the afternoons and evenings, I mean, I think everybody on this podcast, a lot of our listeners know I'm a night owl, so I'm up at all crazy hours anyway. And it was just like I'm already steeped in day-to-day Star Trek by working on the STA game. So this was just adding more of that on top of it. It was like not only am I working on STA stuff, but now I'm multitasking that Star Trek into this. And I mean, I've always got an episode on in the background of something, fortunately with the discs or Paramount Plus, you can just constantly have something going on in the background. So I'm constantly ingesting, even subliminally, episodes. And if I'm not listening to the episodes, I've got all the soundtracks, right? So I'm constantly listening to music in the background, because I need that background noise to really effectively work. I know that's just different from other people. And then to answer your question, Michael, I was really aggressive with Star Trek Adventures last year, just to try to clear as much of that as I could out of my head and get it on the machine that it is, so that I could focus more on this, and not just working on my own stuff. But I know we also had a really robust peer review set up, and that we really wanted to help each other with our spreads and our entries and stuff. And so I wanted to make sure that I had time not just to work on my own stuff, but to support you all as well in a timely fashion, so we could just keep stuff moving to DK.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So what are you most excited about? Let's get in the book so people can listen to it. Like, what are you most excited about that you want people to get out of this publication? People on the podcast, they're just thinking.
I think we're all thinking. I'll throw out there. I think what am I most excited about? I think I'm and I'm selfish because, like, as a writer and also the project manager for Star Trek Adventures, I'm most excited about the fact that we can have the timeline in one place in a visual fashion, in a visual medium. So instead of searching through all the different teleplays and all the screenplays and all the thousands of pages on Memory Alpha or whatever, we've got one handy book, and it's got a white background on most of the pages, so we can annotate as needed. But I'm excited at the possibilities of ideas that are going to come out of this when writers and prospective writers for not just Star Trek Adventures, but also just the bigger world of Star Trek, like novelists, short story writers, maybe even the screenplay writers, I don't know, they're going to be able to see things in a way they're like, oh, this happened at the same time as this, or this person was doing this the same time this person was doing that. Maybe they met. What does that look like? And like all those possibilities of story that we haven't seen yet over 60 years of the Star Trek franchise. That's what I'm most excited about. I'm most excited to see, what does this book unlock in other people, moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Very good. How about the others? What do you think?
Jim and I ended up with some of the assignments of like the interstitial periods, like there's some long periods of history between series when you think probably nothing's happening, but there are actually events in most of these eras that were mentioned in maybe in passing in certain episodes or gestured at, and so I really enjoyed being able to populate those sections. Like I had the early universe, and then there was a chunk from I think the end of Prodigy until 32nd century kind of thing. And it was complex to have to collect all those, and that was a bit of a team effort to find all those things. But I really liked seeing it come together, and now those areas are filled in my mind, whereas before I kind of saw them as voids, but they're not. But there's still plenty of room for creative storytelling, to happen there. So I'm excited to have those sort of on the board, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of Star Trek fans getting in rooms riffing about, wait, is this interconnected? Is this, why not? I fill in those gaps.
I like how the book just brings together and kind of coalesces the Star Trek universe, and I think what happens often, at least this has been my experience, what happens often is you watch a Star Trek series or you have a Star Trek series or film that's your favorite, and you'll repeat watching that one a lot, right? Mm-hmm. But what this book does, even in my opinion, more so than like Memory Alpha, is that it coalesces it all. So you start to see the expanded Star Trek universe working as a cohesive whole. And I think that's great for gamers, for people playing Star Trek Adventures. It's great for writers, like Jim said. But it's in my opinion, is mainly great for the average fan or person who doesn't know anything about Star Trek and is curious, because now if they're looking at, for example, 1 year and they see like 3 things happening from 3 different series, you might have just gotten the person to investigate those 3 different Star Trek series, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Some were definitely way more complex to write than others too. Whereas, you can do one entry to sum up a show from 1966 or a Voyager episode. Some of these newer series take like a lot. There's so many more nuggets. And does that show that the consumers of information now too, I think about like people who watch Star Trek, is the way people consuming stories different in how much information they can take in a TV show? Because now there used to just be alpha beta stories in a show. Now it seems like there's everything, alpha, beta, delta, gamma, all these layers to these shows. They're very complex now.
Well, Deep Space Nine was like the first television show, I think the first or one of the first to start episodic episodes, that where you have like, I think that like their first one was like the Marquee or like the end of first season, where they had like 2 or 3 episodes back to back that all joined together. And then by the time you get to 4th and 5th season of Deep Space Nine, these episodes are running in a chain where, you need to watch them all together. So, and I know that was the first for Star Trek, but I think that was the first for like American television as well. So
Yeah, that serialized like format
format, right.
is definitely, I think, more popular now in television shows. We've kind of seen a shift to that, but it did make the the process of writing this book interesting because like I had Discovery seasons 1 and 2, and those are definitely serialized, and they have like a braided narrative situation where there's like 3 season long plots that are being developed, and you have to track all 3. You can't like leave one of them out because they're all really important. So it was interesting to the sort of the difference in the storytelling styles. I personally appreciate both of them. There's something short and sweet and awesome about a self-contained episode that is a full story in and of itself. But like Derek said, there's also just some mastercraft in some well-told serialized seasons.
Yeah, this was a real education in screenwriting because like I saw 3 different things going on, right? You had the classic series that were 45, 50 minutes, and you can contain all that in one entry, right? Pretty easily, except for the 2-parters. And if there was like a really important episode like Family or something, but then like you're saying, Kelly, you get to like Strange New Worlds and Discovery, where there's just so much going on. 1 or 2 entries isn't enough. And then on a third note, Lower Decks is a 24-minute show, right? But they pack so much story into 24 minutes. It's like I can't possibly sum up this one episode in one entry because there's like 8 different things going on in 24 minutes, right? And so it was really interesting to see the difference between the self-contained 45-minute episodes and the serialized longer episodes, and then Lower Decks, which is shorter. I don't know if you experienced that same issue with Prodigy, because Prodigy's episodes were pretty short too.
Yes, that was definitely a thing with Prodigy, and I think it's maybe worth noting for listeners that this book, our assignment was to capture events on the timeline, not necessarily just to do episode summaries. They wanted each episode covered at least once, but there are some episodes where multiple really important events happen, and so you're going to see multiple entries from that, which made it more complex and more cool and feel a little bit more like journalism.
Well, that's where the writing style comes in too. So you're talking about braided stories. If you think about TOS, you usually just got Spock, McCoy, and Kirk highlighted generally, right? They're driving the main narrative. And then you move into like Picard, where Seven and Rafi have story and Worf has story and Data, and trying to, despite all that, say, okay, but what was the impact of this episode on the continuum at large, and being able to select those? That was a challenge. That was really hard because I know I feel that there's so many good stories to be told, and I wanted to tell everything. That wasn't the assignment. That wasn't the assignment, right? Those will be expounded on for years. Memory Alpha will handle stuff like that, or specialty books about Rafi Musika or something. We were like, what are the events that carried this timeline forward? So, people, when they see it, they're gonna be like, yeah, that summed up the episode, but it's not everything that happened in the episode. That would be fill up in the library of encyclopedias,
Unfortunately, we could not include absolutely everything. There was some discretion that had to be included here, but it's so comprehensive.
Yeah.
So
Derek mentioned using the scripts too. I know I for sure relied on those scripts a lot, and there was a lot of stuff I learned. I know in our discussions, our peer review, me and Tim be like, where'd you get that from? And one of us had found this obscure line said by some character that established, oh, that's what happened. That was actually a fun treasure hunt to do. For like, oh, I didn't even realize that. I've been watching this show for 20 years, and to miss that one line that maybe someone said, I thought that was super cool.
There are definitely gems, that come up or things that like locked into place that was like, oh, I never like put, those 2 things together or whatever. It was very fun. It was like a scavenger hunt as a Star Trek fan.
Well, remember one of the Voyager teasers that they always talked about was, how old is Tuvok? Doing this project, I know exactly how old he is in 2373 now. I hit the, and all of a sudden I had this epiphany moment. I got up, ran upstairs to my wife. I was like, oh, I know how old Tuvok is. And I thought that was like a cool little, I wonder if anybody else did that in Star Trek fandom before this book came out, I don't know. Did you have any moments like that?
There was like, I mean, I mentioned this on the podcast we did yesterday, but like the piecing together like the actual order of events for each of the Prodigy characters and where they go in their experience. Like the first time I watched the show, I didn't realize how long Chakotay had been off doing whatever. Like those timelines are kind of wicked for some of the characters that they've kind of gone through some pretty brutal stuff. Once I sort of laid it all out, and that was interesting to see.
I think for me, the only thing I kind of like got different out of this was, or knew out of this, was that now I can think of, before I would think of Star Trek in regards to like we would talk about episodes or characters, but now I can think of Star Trek in terms and in reference of years. So now I know what year something happened, and I know the totality of that. Like I know 2266 was a really bad year for Kirk, really bad year. And 2375 was a good and bad year for like the Alpha Quadrant. So it's things like that you just start to think of and start to pick up over time. And I think that I really appreciated that, because it kind of filled out my understanding of Star Trek and the Star Trek universe.
Well, now you got to expound. 2266. Why was it such a bad year for Kirk compared to all those?
Oh man, that's City on the Edge of Forever. That's when he loses Edith Keeler. Just a lot of stuff. That's a lot of that is like first and second season episodes. But a lot of bad things happen to him. He's tortured several times. I mean, he loses Edith Keeler. All this stuff happens to this guy in like 2266. And I'm like, wow, that's a really bad year for you, man. So
that's funny. When I realized reading through your TOS and TAS entries, it's like they need to have a Starfleet Academy class just for you're probably going to get possessed at some point, like possession because of budget. Right. And someone here in the group I think said because of budgetary reasons, sci-fi oftentimes had to do possession because you couldn't maybe hire all the actors you want. So you have to bring the problem in, the conflict to the characters. And I was like, wow, they did that a lot back then in those days.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you, Jim? Any epiphanies that you had?
I mean, other than the just the general epiphany, I don't know that it was so much of an epiphany, just a reinforcement of appreciation of how cohesive the universe is after 60 years and thousands of people contributing to it, that they have a fairly consistent through line from the beginning of time all the way out to Calypso and beyond. Like it's consistent Star Trek feel, right? Of hope and diversity and just general timeline shenanigans. I think some of the stuff I was excited about was like the really, really nerdy minutia type of stuff. Like the one example that comes to mind is O'Brien participated in the Setlik 3 massacre, but was that in 2347 or was it 2362? Right. So there's a gap of years there. And it's like, well, he's older and more experienced, so it makes sense for it to be earlier, the 47, but because it was originally canonically in 62, which is it. So going back and forth with Paramount and saying, laying out our evidence and our reasoning for our dates, and then them coming back to us and saying, yeah, I think you're right. That's good. Go with that. And then making that adjustment is like, okay, now we're kind of like helping Paramount think about certain events that maybe they haven't had to think about before, and kind of not forcing them to pin it down, but like encouraging them to say, okay, it could be here or it could be here. Where are we going to put it in the book? As opposed to just kind of like making it a floating entry and just like make a best guess. So it was fun to kind of like start nailing it down a little bit. And, even though the books aren't really official canon because canon is only what's on screen, I think this book is going to be just about as close as you can get to canon as we can, until another episode comes out and changes it. Right? We can't control that.
But
I think that's good.
I'm sorry, but Jim, just going with what Jim said, I think this book is probably one of, if not the closest reference books or chronologies to canon, because even the earlier Okuda chronology books, they filled in, like Kelly was saying, they filled in some of those lean years where we really don't know what happened with Trek, but that wasn't our job for this one, right? It was not to fill in, was just to use canon. So I think if anyone is interested in something that's I would say like 98, 99, maybe 100% all canon. It's this book.
Yeah, I agree. Unless a future show changes it for some reason,
right.
It is what it is. This is a historical reference tool, is what it is. I think it would be interesting at some point in future shows, Jim and Derek and Kelli, to talk about the notes and the discussions we had with Paramount on certain subjects. I know the one that was the most challenging, which I can't wait for fans to read about, is when was Khan Noonien Singh born? When did the eugenics war happen? When did World War III really start? These dates have now been discussed and established in this book. And those are things I've been wondering for 20 years. And then you find little clues in maybe a Strange New World episode, something a Romulan says. It's like, oh, and all that was brought together. We discussed it as a group. It would go off to DK. They would forward it off to Paramount. And then a decision had to be made. And sometimes the decision could be, okay, the timeline has a funky wonky thing here, and that has to be explained. So I thought that was super cool. I think it does a lot of fan service.
They came up with a good mechanic for explaining that in the book, like that you'll see some little entries that sort of help the reader for spots like that. So yeah, I think it works.
Why don't we give? Oh, go ahead, Derek, and I'll give people a preview of some of the pages. Mm-hmm.
I had a big one where the Enterprise refit, like after Kirk's 5-year mission, a lot of people have always wondered, like, what year did the refit actually happen, right before or almost like during the events, so right before the events of the motion picture. And so we had to speak to Paramount and figure out to nail down an actual year based on dialogue. Like Scotty says, oh, the Enterprise has been under refit for 18 months. And then you look at the animated series and figure out when that ended and all that. So that's in there now. So that's cool.
Yeah.
The trickiest part, I think, for me was anytime you have someone going back and changing the past, it gets a little tricky because what do you do with that thing that used to be true that is no longer true? Where does it go on a timeline? And there's a whole lot of that in Prodigy season 2, and so there was a lot of back and forth with the editors and with Paramount for us to figure out what was the most coherent way for us to represent that.
Yeah. And just, we also discovered that there's a lot of stories with threads that can still be told and finished too. There's a lot of things I was like, what happened here? Like, and we look all over and we're like, oh, wow, they never really resolved that. So the potential for future stories and more timelines based off that is kind of cool, right? Mm-hmm. All right, let's share. We got some of Derek's pages, which is really cool. So maybe Derek, you could talk us through it, and then everyone we could chime in about what we thought about these page designs. Here's a sample, mind you, in the upper right-hand corner. This might change. We're still in final edits at this point. Some stuff still has to get approved by Paramount. They may come back and make some changes. But all of you can take a look at these prelim pages. Derek, this is part of. Oh no, this is
Kelli's pages.
Sorry, I'm 2152. Yeah, I'm getting 2152 Enterprises. All Kelli. Kelli, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so I absolutely loved covering Star Trek Enterprise because it's like the first humans out of the gate out in space, getting to do awesome stuff. I absolutely love Thylac Shran and all of those interactions with Captain Archer. And then there are some little time travel loops and things when Archer, interacts with Daniels. So I think this page has some really key character moments. Like you've got the interaction with T'Pol when she goes after the missing fugitive, and you've got the is that Wei Tan, the Andorian situation where they try to pull Archer in. Mm-hmm. This is so small. I can't really see what's going on here.
And then there's these call outs too, which are cool. You want to talk about those call outs?
Yeah. So one of my favorite parts of our assignment was they wanted us to do some pull quotes from the content that was on the spread to kind of do these little call outs. And I just loved being able to find really solid chunks of dialogue to put here. And so, of course, I had to include one from Shran.
All right. And then, Derek, you do a good explanation of these colors and why there's going to be a deviation here. You had mentioned that. You want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. They are the three, I guess you could say, command colors or
division colors.
Thank you, Kelly. That's better. Kelly can do it better than I can. Division colors, starting from like the original series. And what I think is, which is so cool in Kelly's spread, is that we see that the what's the representative for the gold, which is command, that goes off and it kind of like fades into the ether, which is a representative of that timeline. I think that's really, really cool. But these division stripes or division colors run throughout every page of the book to kind of give the reader some kind of indication of what is happening at a certain time in that year.
Yeah, so that little yellow spike is an alternate timeline where something happens to Archer, and he's on this alternate timeline, but then he undoes it and gets sent back, and so that's why it like fades off. And then can you see at the top there's like a little gray loop? That's a little time travel loop. So the crew go back in time to do something and then end up back on the main timeline.
Something we tried to make happen for people is if you see them go back, for instance, to 2004, you can now turn back pages to the year of 2004, see what happened, what the action was there, and then it will say they returned to 2153, and so you can go back. It'll be interesting to see how people choose to read this book, like in what order. Jim, do you want to talk a little bit about the picture selection process? Because I thought that was super fun.
Oh, yeah. I think that was one of the neat opportunities that we had with this book, is not only were we writing the entries for everything, but DK and our editors gave us the opportunity to also include screen grabs, right? If we had a specific image in our head, we've all watched a million episodes of Star Trek, and we've got all the reference books and all this stuff. So we know broadly all the different images that are available out there. And plus we know that DK had access to all the episodes so that they could pull, high res screenshots from everything. But it was a really fun opportunity, like Kelly was saying, to pull quotes, but also for us to say, this image would probably work really well with this entry, or this image would work really well. And to give the designers a bunch of options that they could then say, okay, we're laying out the overall spread. We're going to use this and this and this because it looks best with the composition. It was really cool to have the opportunity to pick images. But I think also in some cases, the editors gave us some ability to create stamps, like rough sketches of what these sketches would look, what these spreads would look like. If we, especially for the feature spreads, if we had a vision of like how we wanted it to be kind of laid out and envisioned, we could put together a sketch or a design or something to kind of help them see what the flow of the entries was going to be, along with the pictures and the quotes. And I think that was just a really fun collaborative process. I think putting those together and then seeing what the layout team came up with.
Yeah, we don't have any example of feature spreads yet to show you all. Probably in the coming months we will. But a feature spread is basically like ones we know will be in there for sure. The captains, each captain will have their own feature spread going through their big life events that form them into the person that they are by the time we see them last on the show. And those are going to be a little different than this. They're going to be a little bit more artistic and try to be tuned into the personality or whatever the topic is. So those will be fun, and those will be interspersed. We don't even know at this point exactly where they're going to be interspersed in the book, but again, it'll give you a chance to get a comprehensive. And we tried to capture maybe events that aren't on the timeline because maybe it's just focused on that captain's life. So we had to get creative with that. I like the picture selection process because we know a picture tells 1,000 words, and I wanted to create, like the pictures I chose, I wanted to create the world of Star Trek. Like, sure, we could have Captain Kirk in every photo, but everyone knows what Captain Kirk looks like, So I wanted to say, well, what was that weird alien stuff they're interacting with, or who are the species that maybe had a big impact?
You can see on this spread, we've got Xindi eggs and Xindi aquatic and a sphere builder, and like all the really alien stuff.
Yeah, and on the previous page, I like, of course, this is cool. There's certain, what would I say, iconic photos or iconic costumes, but I like how you capture the weirdness here of the technology, and again, these settings, Andorians are beautiful, of course. So, it is really cool, that piece of it.
Yeah, I want to add that I think we all took advantage of this. It was nice to be able to have the pictures in there because we knew that most of the pictures would also have captions. And if we were limited in space in our entries, we knew that we could use the picture caption to maybe get just a little bit more information in there about the episode. And so if we, just to get as much information onto the page as possible, if we couldn't cover it in the entry, we could maybe use a little bit of space in the picture caption to add more context and more detail.
And it's really cool to have the opportunity to select pictures, and you all are saying, I was also trying to tell a visual story because that's what DK is known for in their books, so you want to tell a visual story and you want to try and pick images that are striking and that things like you're saying, Michael, that maybe fans haven't always seen, the offbeat image that will spark their interest,
Yeah, I think I appreciate it too after selecting so many pictures that, so many we couldn't select also is how many actors Star Trek has employed over 60 years that are in so many different shows. So I did, if I found like a actor, I'm like, I bet you people forgot that this person was on Star Trek. I would try to use that picture just so people see the wide berth of talent that's been brought into the amazing diversity of talent that's been brought into the show. Something that I learned there. All right.
You might want to really quick bring the spreads back up and highlight some of the color coded entries, the science entries, the ones that are red, blue, and yellow.
Yeah, let's see that.
That was a fun ability to if there were certain topics we were talking about that didn't really fit in a main timeline entry, we had the ability to drop those into colored boxes throughout the entry. So you see there's 2 blue ones here. Those are science entries that talk about specific elements that are related to the entries that we've been talking about. I don't know if there's another one on here.
No, there's not another example.
Yeah.
That the other type of entries would be called floating entries, meaning that you'll see them. We can't pin it down to a specific time, a specific year. Maybe we know it happened before or after a certain number of events. So you'll see floating entries also. What other entries did we have too?
We also had Department of Temporal Investigations entries, which is where there's sort of like weird timeline stuff going on. You might see a little entry, attempting to explain or give context for some of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, the quotes are their own type of entry. And I think I noticed as I was reading through all the quotes you all selected, I was really impressed that the general theme of them, through them, is just the good values that Star Trek pulls into its stories. Like some of the quotes you all brought, I forgot. And I was like, oh, that's so perfect for this page, And so I thought the quotes are actually going to be probably one of my favorite reads is just to go through and read the quotes.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, Michael. One of the joys of working on the Star Trek Adventures books is that we do get to put a pull quote at the beginning of every subchapter. And so being able to do the same thing here, it was great just to go back to the scripts, find a cool quote. And then, of course, especially for dialogue, you got to reference it against the actual episode because sometimes things change in between the final script and the actual filming of it, right? But it's just when you get lucky and you find the perfect piece of dialogue that makes the right quote. But also, I know that we also, I did. I think you did too. You all did too. Is like if you find a great piece of dialogue, that was a really good way to use as an entry title. And sometimes it worked out great because I think we had a 5-word limit for our entry titles. So sometimes the piece of dialogue was exactly 5 words or 4 words. It's like, oh, it's perfect that we can use it. So it was just it was great fun to dig those up and make use of them.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever told you this, Derek, because I want to compliment something you did on one of your spreads. I'll give everyone a little Easter egg here. Undiscovered Country is my favorite movie of all time. Me and my sister, she's here, I'm visiting her in North Carolina right now. We can go through the entire script verbally.
Oh, wow, that's great.
I have Nicholas Meyer's original script. I have a copy of his original script on it too, which has some deviations and additional stuff than the movie. Yeah. So, and Derek, everyone just know he got to do this page. Now, anyone in the universe think I would be doing this page, right? But when I got to your page, finally, you got it. And you were using the quotations, which me and my sister have memorized over 30 years. And you were using the quotations for those headers like Jim talked about. I was like, no one could have done it. I could have done it. Like, it's exactly the quotes I would have pulled. All the stuff me and my sister walk around the house saying. You pulled it, and it just showed how beautiful Nicholas Meyer's writing was too, and that you captured that. It's just really good. I just have to compliment you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But I think that's something that we all did, is that we, as Jim was just saying, we really found quotes that fit that moment. And I think it's because we all love Star Trek. There's no denying that, and we all love it. We all watch it, and we all have our own, the four of us and all the fans, we all have our personal relationship with Star Trek or elements of Star Trek. So one of the things that I enjoyed in like looking over finished spreads was seeing the quotes that you all picked. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good quote. That's a good quote. That's a better quote than I would have picked. And just to be honest about that, So yeah, that was a really I think one of the most probably newish and entertaining things for me, because I don't know what quotes you guys are picking, right? And I know the stories and stuff, but then until I see your actual pages, I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. So that was fun, yeah, for sure.
Totally cool. All right, we know this show would not be a full. Oh, go ahead, Jim. Wants to add something.
Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to Derek, it just sparked a thought in me, and I just I'm not going to give any examples, but in terms of Easter eggs, just like every series of Star Trek is Star Trek, but it's also of a reflection of the time that it was created in. I think this book is also, it's a history of Star Trek, but I think if you look into it at a certain level, it's also a reflection of the time in which it was written. Because I know a lot of my entry titles were inspired by the social media gestalt and all the stuff that I've absorbed over the decades of in entertainment and media and movies and television and dialogue and titles and stuff. A lot of that, not a lot of it, some of it crept into the titles that I was using on it. So you might see some little veiled references to other stuff, because we're all geeks, right? So pop culture is pervasive in this book, I think, even if it was kind of subliminal and subconscious. And I hope fans catch some of that stuff. That was, some of it was unintentional, but some of it, for me anyway, was absolutely intentional to find a way to tweak a popular phrase and Star Trekify it.
Well, I think a couple of them I got kicked back for being a little too blatantly obvious referential.
It's funny because that you and Jim are saying that, Michael, because I know I started to get a little quirky with some of my titles, and I got a note back from Paramount. It was like, "Oh, you can go in, go more, do more." I'm like, "More?" They're like, "Do more." So then I just started to go nuts with that, and nice. and they seem to like it. So I think that's going to be fun for the readers too, is to see that we're chronicling Star Trek, but we're also, like you said, Jim, we're making it like almost like a social commentary in some respects. So I think that's going to be fun for the readers.
Well, even more on the social commentary, I want to say, going back to the big pool quotes that we add up there, I did it intentionally. I know we live in times that are stressful for a lot of people, very dark times where people are losing hope. And I intentionally wanted to pull the best of the best quotes from the various characters, not just the captains or something like that, but even characters who aren't on the ship, where powerful statements were said that are almost equal to proverbs that you could go by, and to me, that story alone is like, yeah, that's right. This is our humanity. This is what it's about. And I noticed you all did the same thing, that it's very inspiring. I mean, this could be not only a coffee table book, but one of those little daily reminder calendars that you could put in just to keep us all going.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about this. We can't end the show without talking about Star Trek adventures in some form or fashion. How do y'all, let's start it with you, Jim, as project manager of Modiphius for 10 years, line editor, project manager for over 10 years. How could someone who plays RPG use this book? And then everyone, you can chime in since you're all Star Trek adventure enthusiasts.
I mean, I could go on for a whole other episode about this, but I think the initial point would be to have a copy of this with you at session 0 and say, okay, we're going to do a Star Trek game. Players, here, what kind of campaign do you want, and when in the timeline do you want this thing set, right? Because like you pick, movie era. Okay, here's 30 pages. Here's all this stuff that happened in the movie era. Is there a particular point in this timeline that you want to get started? Or like Kelly was saying earlier, if you look at the sections that are kind of lean, that canon hasn't really touched yet, and say, okay, we want to do a Lost Era campaign. Here's what we know happened, and now let's start filling in the blanks and start making our own campaign based on what we know or don't know. So I think just as a reference tool and a planning tool, I think that's just the start of it.
That's nice. D, what do you think? Derek, sorry. I keep I have a family member named D, so I'm always it's called Derek D. Sorry, Derek. Go ahead.
That's right. I think for me, and I think what would be really great for people playing Star Trek Adventures is all storytelling, whether it's role playing or short stories, long form writing, script writing, all storytelling needs authenticity, right? So what this book does is, yes, you may want to look for the lean years or certain things that happen, but what I think, if you're creating your character and you want to do your character's backstory, you can figure out the age of your character and say, well, how old was this character at 5? How old were they at 8, at 10? And were there events that happened during those years that maybe informed the character's personality? And what that in turn does is that it gives that character a certain level of authenticity. Like if they were, let's just say an example, 8 years old during the year of Wolf 359, and their parent had to leave, that's really informative, right?
So you're talking career events. You're talking career events. Oh, that's
every
awesome.
anniversary that is affecting them. I mean, that's pretty much the story in some ways of Jake Sisko, right? So that's affecting the character, and now you have a character that has a much deeper level of authenticity and believability when you play it. So
I love that. Or even like, who may they have met? Like maybe Uhura was still alive, but 90 years old at that time, and maybe they want to weave that into their backstory. Oh, I love that. Oh, how about you, Kelly? How might you use it?
So when I teach game writing at the university level, I'm always encouraging my TTRPG students to think about story hooks, like little nuggets of information that could be spun out into the premise of an adventure. And I feel like this book is replete with these, because every single Star Trek plot either has a tiny loose thread or something that maybe got wrapped up for now, but does it come back around? And so I feel like you can flip through this book and find some of those little nuggets and little hooks and be like, okay, we want to pick this up and go tell the untold story of that planet after the Enterprise left it, or the Vesda after they were re-imprisoned. Okay, now what happens to them? So I think it's just a treasure trove of hooks.
That's actually mine's exactly the same. That my thing is like, what happened to the Voth? Are they coming back to Earth? This is Voyagers, those reptilian dinosaur offspring. Like how many technology objects were not destroyed, or maybe they thought they were destroyed, and your characters and your crew can come back and rediscover. I mean, you could just play it page by page and have endless missions probably with this. So I think this is going to be like an amazing tool for people who play RPG, excuse me, for the cough in the future.
Yeah, I think there's.
Oh, go ahead.
I think there's another maybe a way that can be used of like just seeing the diversity of story structure and story type. And I know we've done episodes before talking about genre within Star Trek, but I mean, you can skim and just get a whole diversity of what type of stories are even available. So especially somebody who's new to Star Trek, who wants to run Star Trek Adventures, I think that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even going back to canon events, some people don't want to play canon because it's too much. It is too much, 60 years of history. So now you could look and say, we're not going to touch any of this. So I'm going to put us on this side of the galaxy. So those are possibilities, or to your point, lost era when there's not that many actions, which is really cool. And we encourage people in RPG too. When you're playing RPG, you are creating an alternate timeline. So if you may have your own book that takes a little yellow line and takes you off to divergent reality, that's okay. We want that. It's your game. Cool. So again, we're going to be talking. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, in fact, I think Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds helped establish that there is in fact a multiverse within the Star Trek universe. So if you want to make yourself say we're going to follow canon up to this page, and then everything after this page in the book, just ignore it. We're going to make our own thing now. No reason you couldn't do that.
Exactly. It's going to be fun. This is going to spark the imagination for thousands of people tens of thousands over the next decades in so many form and function. And we're going to be talking a lot about it on this show, of course. Even I know, just as an anecdote, had a conversation with one of the novelists over email. I had a conversation with one of the novelists, and she was like, oh, this is good. I can use this. And this is one of the New York Times bestseller novelists too, right? So we'll have her back on the show probably to talk about that at some point, which will be super cool. So I think we're good for gratitude because we know we're going to have many, many shows, right, to talk about in the future. So let's go to gratitude. I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. Y'all schooled me. This was my first big media tie-in. I've done media tie-in before. I've had the privilege of doing over 20 books with Modiphius. I still can't believe I was asked to do this book, honestly, but I guess somebody has to be the green one. Somebody has to be. So that was me. Like what I learned, from Kelli, your double degrees in English definitely are well earned. Your knowledge of the English language, this is why you're teaching students every year and making them better. You definitely made me better. I'll never forget what a dangling modifier is. It's now on a Post-it note on my computer. Like, am I using dangling modifiers? Which, super cool. Derek, again, my gratitude to you. Your knowledge of canon and man, like I aspire, I don't know if my brain could ever be where your brain is at on that, but I aspire to notice the details. I'm going to have to really start getting into the details and characters. And you were constantly, let me appreciate, like, don't assume what happened. This is what happened. And that made me slow down because I get impulsive. I'm an enthusiastic person. My mind goes off, and I've had to really slow down and learn patience in the process. So you mentored me very well on that. And then Jim, again, you're editing extraordinaire. You're man, I know what to italicize and not italicize for the rest of my life with you, and when to use the number 9 and when to spell it out. So again, your decade of, and just, our friendship, of course, on this podcast, you've rubbed off on me in immense ways. So that's my gratitude to all three of you. And I have to say to all the fans, this is our love letter to you. 60 years of Star Trek goodness. Yes, this is canon, what's in this book. And so we enjoy having many, many discussions with many fans for the next, decades about this. All right, let's go, Kelli, Derek, and Jim to close out gratitude.
So, ditto gratitude to all of my team and everybody at DK who's been supporting us through this process. They're very much a part of the team. And I also just want to give gratitude to the original creators of Star Trek and to all creators who create optimistic science fiction that envisions a better tomorrow, because that has influenced my life, not just creatively, but just as a human being moving through the world. And I aspire to do that, myself. And so I'm very grateful to have had great examples to look to, including Star Trek.
Wow. That's beautiful. I would say first and foremost, I would have gratitude to the fans, because it's the fans that have literally kept Star Trek alive and pushing it forward. All those, and even if you want to go back, to Mr. Gene Roddenberry and his vision for a hopeful future, not necessarily a utopia, but a hopeful future that we all took up that dream and bought into to help push that forward. So I think that's a really big deal, because we're talking about over a half century now of material, and I think that's really cool. And I would say also, I'm really grateful for our peer reviews. I think our peer reviews that I think it was Kelli that suggested we do peer reviews, and we start that. I think that was a really, really good format. And I appreciate everyone's patience with my first drafts. I only wrote a first draft every time I entered a peer review. And then after taking it from you all, then I tightened it up. So I appreciate that. I think that was really, really smart and really cool. And it probably in the end helped streamline as long as this took. I was thinking the other day, wow, without that peer review, what would this process have been? So I think that's something that's really, really appreciative for me. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to all of that, I am grateful to everybody who's worked on Star Trek over the 60 years, because you've given us such an imaginative, amazing tapestry to play with and to work with. And it's absolutely an honor for me to have an opportunity to work on this and to pay it back, right? Like I'm a lifelong Star Trek fan. I know there's so many Star Trek fans that are eager for something like this, and to be able to be in a place to be working on it with all of you and to say, look, we're putting all of our love of Star Trek into this book and making it as factual as possible, and then giving it to you to go do amazing stuff with, right? Whether you're writing fanfic or you're writing, Star Trek Adventures, or you're writing a screenplay, or you're just, enjoying it for the sake of enjoying Star Trek, right? There's just so much to love about the franchise and its message and its hopeful vision. And gosh, we need that now more than ever. And if this just helps somebody discover and appreciate Star Trek, like if they read an entry and go, oh, what episode is that from? And then they go watch it, that's a win. And if we can enable that in somebody and go see something that's joyful and hopeful and gives them a bright moment in their day, then that's a win. So I'm grateful for everybody who's worked on this up to this point that gave us, the movement forward to continue that path, right? And I'm sure somewhere down the road, someone else is going to write a book that does the 80 years of Star Trek or the 100 years of Star Trek, right? And hopefully they'll look at our stuff and use that as a reference tool, and then go on to the next thing.
Trekstorians for life, all of us. Trekstorians. I tell you, I'm going to keep saying, I'm so proud of that, walking around thinking about that all day long. All right. Well, Star Trek Adventures, continuing conversations about infinite stories and infinite combinations. And all, three of you have been and will continue to immensely continue to the stories that people tell in this genre because of this amazing work. So until next time, everyone, IDIC.
Live long and prosper, everybody. Be safe, be well. We'll see you all next time.
Take care.